$30 billion in big oil subsidies. Now, this is part of why I think there's very little intellectual honesty on the Republican side. Now, most Republicans are just carrying out marching orders from their corporate donors while they pretend to be in favor of small government principles. Now, with the exception of perhaps one Republican, and that is specifically my next guest. Joining me now is the Republican congressman from Texas and former and perhaps future presidential candidate Ron Paul. Congressman Paul, now, I think a lot of the guys on your side, to be honest with you, take money from corporate donors, as I said. You seem to have some principles that you get a lot of respect for that, whether it's in the conservative community or it's in the online community. But today or yesterday, you voted for those oil subsidies as well, $30 billion. Why'd you do that?
Well, how do you define a subsidy? See, I don't consider any tax break as a subsidy. That was not a spending bill. That was not a grant. So if they get benefits, I never vote to increase any taxes. I vote to always give tax credits, and I always cut spending. I've never voted for a real spending bill. So I don't think that is in the category of what I would consider a spending bill.
Oh, that's interesting. What do you think should be the proper income tax rate?
Well, the best would be zero. I mean, we lived most of our history with zero income tax, but you'd have to have a proper sized government. You'd have to have a proper role for government. You can't be the policeman of the world and not have an income tax. So I would not have all my troops around the world. I'd bring the troops home, and I wouldn't have a military-industrial complex that demands so much, but I wouldn't have a welfare state either. And under those conditions, you don't need an income tax. And I think that's the way it should be.
You got to raise money somehow, right? I mean, so how would you raise money if you had 0% income tax?
Well, how did they raise it before 1913? You know, they had excise taxes and some import taxes, but it wasn't a matter of how you raised the money. It was who was demanding the money. But there's an endless demand when you concede so much to the military-industrial complex and a militaristic foreign policy, and you say that you have to redistribute wealth from cradle to grave and take care of people. I think when people take money from you and give it to somebody else, that's equivalent to stealing from you. I don't want to take any of your money. I want you to invest it and create jobs. So, and I'm personally convinced that I'm on the side of the humanitarian side of this, because if you care about poor people and jobs, you're going to have them more likely if you do it that way rather than the government spending the money. Because just look at where we've been with all this spending and printing of money and bailing out. Who gets all the benefits when you run a system like that where you're pretending to redistribute wealth? You serve the special interests in the powerful corporations. Then when you get into trouble, who gets bailed out? They get bailed out. Wall Streets and the banks get bailed out. And who gets stuck? It's the taxpayers. That's why you need income tax, so you take care of the wealthy.
So now, look, Congressman, we disagree on that, of course. I mean, it's not 1913. I believe we need a little bit more money than you say. But it is an interesting point about defense. Now, if you do non-defense discretionary spending cuts, in fact, if you brought that to zero, you cut everything outside of defense and entitlements, that'd only be $610 billion. You still have a gigantic deficit. So is your proposal the counter to the Republicans, the rest of the Republicans, in saying we must cut defense, and perhaps fairly drastically?
Well, I use a different term. I don't want to cut defense, but I distinguish military spending different from defense spending. You think if we send troops into Libya next week or this week, that's serving our national defense? No, it's going to cost a lot of money, but it won't serve our defense. It's just military spending. So I want to cut military spending, not defense spending, but you could do that with maybe a third of the military budget. You could cut hundreds of billions of dollars from that, and it wouldn't hurt us. But that still wouldn't be enough. I mean, you have to get rid of this redistributive mentality that is right and proper and moral to take from some and give to others. Because when you endorse that system, always intended to help the poor, you help those who distribute the wealth and who are on the gravy train. So the corporations benefit, the people get the crumbs. So look who lost their houses and lost the jobs. We were propping up housing for everybody and giving a gift, low interest loans and all this. It intended to help the poor people have houses. But there were a lot of big companies and mortgage companies made a lot of money, and the builders made money on the way up. They get into trouble with over speculation. We bail them out. We cause a recession, and the poor people lose their jobs and they lose their houses. I cannot see how anybody could endorse that system.
Congressman Paul, you know, a lot of people, of course, do want to spend a lot on defense, namely the Republican Party, certainly some portion of the Democratic Party as well. Whenever you go to cut there, they fearmonger, they scaremonger. So why do you think they're doing it? Is it the money that they're getting from defense contractors?
Well, you have to ask both parties that. The Democrats were supposed to cut back on that too. But no, I think the war profiteers have a lot of influence. I think that if you vote against military spending, the Democrats especially get trapped into it. They finally get in and they take a more non-interventionist policy. Then they get in and they say, oh, we can't look weak on defense. We got to spend. But they also really endorse the policy. See, Republicans and Democrats aren't much different. They believe in the Federal Reserve paper money system. They believe in the welfare system. They believe in the warfare system. They believe in international intervention and running the world. And they also believe in intrusion in our privacy. So I don't see any difference between the leadership of the two parties. Maybe the rhetoric on the Republican side is a little bit better about, yes, less taxes and less spending. But just think, when we had 8 years of a chance to do something, Republicans really didn't cut,
Right. And by the way,
kept spending.
they were also much more in favor of defense spending. I mean, you can say Democrats are a little guilty of that, but certainly Republicans have been pushing for that for decades. But you mentioned the Federal Reserve there. I know one of your biggest legislative accomplishments was with Congressman Alan Grayson in auditing the Fed, and that was very good. But I'm curious about what you think about credit, because you and I have had this discussion before, and I'm not sure a lot of people know this. What do you think should be the credit policy of the United States? Should you be able to borrow money to buy a house, a car, et cetera?
Oh, sure. In a free market, you can do that. But the market generates the credit. If I had an automobile and you and I had a transaction and I want $10,000, I can extend you credit, and all of a sudden there's $10,000 worth of credit. Or an automobile company could do that, or a bank could do that. But the credit really is backed up by savings. The crime that is being committed today is that the credit comes out of thin air. In the old days, what you had to do is you had to put the money in this, and you had to work. You had to live, you had to save, you put your money in the bank, and then they loan it out for you. Today, or for the couple decades, there's been essentially no savings, and the Fed says, well, interest rates are awfully low, but there's no savings. What we're going to do is just give more credit. And it's a false signal. It caused all kinds of malinvestment and all this debt accumulation. So artificial credit by the Fed is wrong. It is an immoral, illegal act, really.
Let me follow up on that real quick, though. What if a kid that's in your district, a poor kid in Texas, got good grades, wants to go to school, doesn't have the money for it because he's poor? Do you think he should be able to, the government should give him a helping hand and give him an opportunity?
No.
Or should he be able to get a loan? Or that's it, tough luck, you're poor, you don't get an education?
Well, no, I mean, you're the government, it's your money. I don't have a right to come to you and say, my poor kid in Texas needs an education. I come to you and knock on the door and say, give me $500. But we send the IRS agent and then it's okay. So no, I have no right to take money from you, and nobody has a right to somebody else's wealth. You have a right to your life and you have a right to your property, but you don't have an education isn't a right. Medical care is not a right. Education, these are things that you have to earn. Now, you might ask, well, what kind of a system would that be? Well, I grew up with that system, but prices were different. There was no inflation. My tuition was $350 a semester. I had jobs in the summertime. I could earn it. When I went to medical school, there were loans available if I'd have needed them, but it was a completely different world. Today,
but there were loans. There were loans. Did you take advantage of those loans?
It was through the school. The school made the loans, but no government loans. There were no government loans.
But you're okay with the school giving loans then?
Oh, sure. I mean, that's credit, and people, endowments, and that's what would happen, but prices would be different. Kids today, even if they work, as soon as they work, we tax them. If they're a waitress or a waiter, we tax their tips. So we encourage them to work. Then they don't have enough money. The prices go up on the tuition, and then we give them grants, and then they get out of college, and they owe $200,000. It makes no sense whatsoever.
All right.
I don't know how anybody can justify it.
Congressman, I know you're big online, so we asked our Facebook audience, we have one on TYT Nation, a question for you. Brian Carter wrote in, Ask him if he really does support Walker's efforts to destroy unions, because we've got a lot of questions on this, and I wanted to ask you about that. Where do you stand on Governor Walker's attempts to go after unions?
It's a loaded question, because I can answer for myself. I do not want to destroy unions, but I don't want to give them artificial power. I want to give the corporations no artificial power, and I don't want to give unions.
Why is collective bargaining artificial power?
Because it's based on law.
The employees getting together in a free market saying, okay, we've gotten together.
Okay. Workers have the right to get together and negotiate. But just as you and I on a voluntary transaction or the actions between two people for social reasons has to be voluntary. Economic transactions have to be the same way. So workers who can voluntarily get together and negotiate, they can negotiate, but they can't force their will by law, and that's what the government has done. They have given them artificial
they're saying
power.
By law you are not allowed to collectively negotiate, which doesn't make sense if you believe in the free market.
I'm talking about my position.
Okay. So then you don't agree
My
with
position
Governor
is you
Walker.
can voluntarily organize and negotiate, but you can't. Nobody has any force. See, the libertarian belief is that you can't use force on people.
So then you don't agree with Governor Walker, because by law he's saying you cannot collectively bargain.
Well, you have to have voluntary. It has to be voluntary on both sides.
Okay, so we're getting.